The lighthouse where every keeper disappears exactly 40 minutes after sunset. At exactly 8:14 p.m. tonight, the sun will dip below the horizon. In precisely 40 minutes, whoever is standing in this lantern room will cease to exist. We're dissecting the haunting logs of a lighthouse that consumes its keepers on a perfect schedule, leaving behind nothing but rotating lights and empty boots. Part 1. The clockwork pattern of the missing. The logs begin normally enough. Routine entries about weather, visibility, oil reserves, the grinding reliability of a 19th century Fresnel lens doing its mechanical duty. But pull the full archive. 143 years of handwritten journals recovered from the iron desk bolted to the stone floor of Cape Morgan Lighthouse, and a shape emerges from the entries like a face rising through dark water.
Slow.
Unmistakable.
Wrong.
11 keepers. 11 disappearances. Not one body recovered from the rocks below, not one coat snagged on the iron railing of the lantern gallery. What the logs give you instead are final entries, each one written in a different hand, each one saturated with the same specific metronome dread. The first vanished keeper was a man named Elias Corve, appointed to Cape Morgan in the autumn of 1883. His log ends on November 14th with a sentence about the quality of the evening light, how the sun seemed reluctant to drop, how it clung to the horizon longer than his tide almanac suggested it should. Maritime historians have since confirmed, sunset at Cape Morgan on November 14th, 1883 occurred at 4:31 p.m. Elias Corve's final entry was timed in the margin at 5:09 p.m. 38 minutes after sunset, by the old brass ship's clock he kept wound on the window ledge. Give or take the imprecision of 19th century timekeeping, the gap was 40 minutes. November 14th, 1883, final entry E. Corve. The light is doing something unusual this evening. The beam seems to pass through the room rather than originate from it. I feel that I am standing inside something that is looking out, rather than the reverse. I will wind the mechanism once more before I eat. The room smells of the sea, though the windows are sealed. The Maritime Authority who investigated Corve's disappearance noted only that the light had continued to function perfectly in the keeper's absence. No one touched the mechanism. No one wounded it. It ran. The second keeper, a widow named Beatrix Fold, who took the post in 1901 after her husband's death at sea, left her financially desperate, lasted 14 months before she too vanished from a locked room at the top of a tower on a calm October evening. Her log, recovered from the desk along with a half-finished cup of tea that had gone cold and then simply gone, contained a detail that would not become meaningful until decades later. She had started marking the sunsets. In the lower margin of her October entries, small notations: sundown, 5:47 p.m. Light functioning. She had been watching the gap. By the week she disappeared, her final notation read, 40 minutes. Always 40 minutes. I have checked this against the clock 7 times. It is always 40 minutes before something in the mechanism changes its sound. October 22nd, 1901. Final entry be Fold. Tonight I will count. I will stand at the lantern and count each second from the moment the sun goes under. I have my watch in my hand. The beam is rotating. The room smells of the sea, as it always does now, though I keep the windows shut tight against the autumn. I am going to begin counting now.
It is almost time.
The light is very beautiful this evening. I wish Thomas could. The entry ends there. Mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-breath. The pen had rolled across the open page, leaving a long ink trail like a seismograph recording the precise moment the earth moved. By the time the third keeper disappeared, a methodical Norwegian named Anders Strand, in 1922, the Maritime Authority had begun to notice a pattern but refused to name it. The investigation notes from that era speak carefully of contributing factors and mechanical failure and the isolated nature of the posting. What they do not speak of, but what Strand's own log makes undeniable, is that he knew. He had been given access to the 2 previous logs as part of his orientation. He had read Beatrix Fold's final notation about the 40-minute interval. He had arrived at Cape Morgan already suspicious. For 11 months, Strand documented his attempt to outwit the lighthouse. He tried leaving the lantern room before sunset each evening, descending the iron staircase to the base, and eating his supper in the stone-floored supply room at the bottom of the tower. The logs report nothing unusual during those nights. He slept well. The light functioned without him, as it had always functioned without anyone, the lens turning in its mercury bath like a slow thought. Then in March 1922, a storm. Strand ascended to the lantern room to check the mechanism's function during heavy weather. He noted the time of his ascent, 6:03 p.m. Sunset that evening at Cape Morgan, 6:09 p.m. He had not intended to be in the room after dark. His log, which he had clearly written before going up, a precaution, a man leaving a record in case he did not return, ends with a calculation. March 17, 1922, pre-ascent note, A. Strand. If the pattern holds, and I have no reason to believe it will not, I have until 6:49 p.m. The storm should ease before that. I will come down by 6:30. This is a simple matter of arithmetic. I am not superstitious. I am a practical man who believes in documented evidence. The documented evidence says 40 minutes. I will be down in 27. The storm did not ease. The relief vessel that arrived 3 days later found the lighthouse operating perfectly. Anders Strand's boots were side by side at the base of the lantern stairs, as though he had simply stepped out of them and kept walking up or sideways, or into some other direction that the geometry of Cape Morgan permitted, but coastal Maine did not. 40 minutes. Always 40, never more. Part 2. Salt and Machinery. The physical lighthouse itself offers its own kind of testimony. Cape Morgan is a second-order lighthouse, built in 1881 from local granite, its walls 4 feet thick at the base and tapering to 2.5 feet at the lantern room. The original Fresnel lens, a 6-panel bioptic instrument that cost the Maritime Authority more than the entire rest of the structure, was replaced in 1954 with an electric rotating mechanism. It did not matter. The disappearances continued on their same precise schedule. The salt is everywhere in the upper rooms. Not the ordinary salt mist of a coastal building. The walls of the lower floors are as dry as any stone building of the era. But from the third landing upward, a fine crystalline deposit coats the iron handrails, the window glass, the surface of the old log desk, the lens housing itself. Engineers who have examined the structure describe it as impossible salinity concentration for an enclosed space. The deposits have been tested. They are not sea salt. The sodium to chloride ratio is consistent with oceanic brine, but the trace mineral profile matches no known coastal water body. Marine chemist Dr. Helene Vaux, who published a paper on the phenomenon in 1997, described the mineral signature as consistent with deep water brine from a depth in excess of 4,000 meters, water that has not been near the surface in thousands of years. The mechanism itself tells a stranger story still. When engineers disassembled the rotating drive unit in 2003 for a routine inspection, they found that the internal gearwork, which should have accumulated decades of wear consistent with continuous operation, showed almost no degradation. The brass components were described in the inspection report as appearing recently manufactured. The duty engineer who wrote the report, a practical woman named Carla Moss, added a handwritten note in the margin. Mechanism appears to have been recently wound. Not by us. Previous inspection 1998. No authorized access since. 2003 inspection report, see Moss Addendum. I am noting for the record that the interior of the lantern room smelled strongly of the sea during our inspection, despite conditions being mild and the gallery windows sealed. At 6:22 p.m. our work was interrupted when the light activated. Sunset was at 6:19 p.m. 3 minutes after dusk. I instructed the team to descend immediately. We were all clear of the lantern room by 6:31 p.m. No one suggested returning. I am recommending continued automated-only classification for this structure. The beam itself is the thing that resists every rational framework. Maritime observers stationed on the far shore have documented a quality to the Cape Morgan beam that distinguishes it from all other working lighthouses on the northeastern coast. The rotation speed is standard, 1 revolution every 10 seconds, as per its original specification. But the light, when it sweeps across the water, casts what observers describe as a doubled shadow, a secondary darkness that moves in the opposite direction from what geometry requires. The beam sweeps east, the dark sweeps west, as though there is something inside the light, moving against it, occupying the negative space of the rotation. Photographer Iris Callum, who spent 3 months on the opposite shore attempting to document this phenomenon in 2019, produced 47 long-exposure photographs of the Cape Morgan beam. In 31 of them, visible only after digital enhancement of the exposure, she found the same silhouette at the center of the light, a figure, arms at its sides, facing outward. Not always the same figure. In some photographs, the silhouette is short and broad. In others, it is tall and narrow. In one photograph, exposure time 11 seconds, capturing a full rotation, there are 3 distinct silhouettes, layered within the beam like transparencies stacked in sequence. Callum did not return to Cape Morgan after her documentation period. In an interview published the following year, she said only, "The lighthouse is not empty. It has never been empty. It is, if anything, becoming more crowded." Part 3. The Growing Dread, Final Entries. What makes the logs of Cape Morgan uniquely disturbing is not the consistency of the disappearances, though that consistency is extraordinary, but the way each keeper's writing changes in the weeks before the end. It is not simply that they become afraid. Fear has a recognizable grammar in written language, short sentences, exclamation, repetition, the compressed syntax of panic. What happens to the Cape Morgan keepers is different. Their writing becomes slower, more considered, more certain. They stop asking what is happening and begin instead to describe it, as though the thing they are observing is patient enough to allow description, to sit still for the record, as though it wants to be documented. September 9, 1958, 3 weeks before. Disappearance, H. Price. I've stopped being afraid of the 40-minute window and have started being afraid of the 39th minute. The 40th minute is only the end of something. The 39th minute is when I can still leave. And every evening I find that I am still here. I have not been able to explain this to myself satisfactorily. I am not being prevented from leaving. I simply do not leave. September 28, 1958. Final entry. H. Price. The beam makes a sound on its rotation that I have not heard described in any lighthouse manual. It is not mechanical. It is something between a voice and water. Tonight it seems to be addressing me directly. The room smells of the sea. The sun went down at 6:47. I have my watch. It is now. Howard Price was 61 years old. He had kept 3 other lighthouses over a 20-year career without incident. His daughter told investigators that he had written her a letter 2 weeks before his final entry in which he described the lighthouse as the most beautiful place I have ever worked and expressed no desire to leave the posting despite the difficulty of the isolation. The temporal anomaly, and it is now difficult to call it anything else, appears to operate exclusively within the lantern room. Keepers who remained below the lantern level after dark reported nothing unusual. The 40-minute window corresponds, in every documented case, to the presence of a human being in the room that houses the light itself. Remove the person, nothing happens. The light continues to turn, the mechanism continues its impossible self-winding, the salt continues to accumulate on every iron surface. But nothing takes anyone. The lighthouse needs a keeper in the lantern room. Not to function, it functions perfectly without one. It needs a keeper for some other purpose. Something that takes exactly 40 minutes and leaves behind nothing but the light and the boots and the salt smell and the lingering warmth of a body that was present in that room a moment ago and is now nowhere that geography can accommodate. The most recent disappearance occurred in 2011. A young researcher named Tomas Vieira, affiliated with a university parapsychology department that has since ceased to exist, obtained access to the structure for a weekend of overnight investigation. He had read all 11 sets of logs. He had prepared detailed protocols. He had a satellite phone, a colleague stationed at the base of the tower as a safety observer, and a digital timer set to vibrate at the 30-minute mark after sunset as a countdown warning. His colleague, waiting at the tower base, watched the time. Heard nothing from above. Sent a text message at the 20-minute mark asking for a status update. Received a reply. All well, remarkable data, timer going. Sent another message at the 35-minute mark. No reply. Climbed the stairs at the 42-minute mark and found the lantern room empty. The satellite phone was on the floor. The digital timer had been stopped manually at 38 seconds, 2 seconds before it would have hit the 40-minute mark. Last recovered text, T. Vieira, November 14, 2011, 8:02 p.m. I understand now why they didn't leave. The light is extraordinary up close. The beam passes through me on each rotation. I can see something on the other side of it. I'm going to describe what I see in the voice recorder. I think maybe what the lighthouse wants is a witness. I think that's all it's ever needed. Someone to see what's on the other side of the epilogue. The light still turns. Cape Morgan Lighthouse is active. It is classified as an automated aid to navigation under the jurisdiction of the Coast Guard, which maintains the mechanism by helicopter drop of components every 18 months. No personnel are required on site. The light has not failed once in 143 years of continuous operation. It does not need anyone. And yet the salt continues to accumulate in the lantern room. The mechanism continues to function beyond the limits of its mechanical lifespan. And on long-exposure photographs taken from the far shore on clear evenings, there are silhouettes in the beam, more of them each year, the photographers say, though none of them can explain how a lighthouse designed to show a beam for miles can also hold a darkness at its center that grows. The logs are archived in a municipal records building 40 miles from the coast. The last entry in the most recent official log, made by a Coast Guard technician during a routine inspection in 2019, reads, in its entirety, mechanism operational.
Structure sound.
Interior of lantern room smells of the sea. No personnel to remain on site after dusk per standing protocol. At 8:14 p.m. in the autumn, the sun drops below the western horizon and the Cape Morgan beam snaps to life by itself, sweeping its rotation across the black Atlantic. The rocks are there. The ships avoid them. The lighthouse is doing exactly what it was built to do. The boots are still in the lantern room. All 11 pairs. The Maritime Authority stopped removing them sometime in the 1970s. They stay, arranged in a loose semicircle near the base of the lens housing, salt-crusted and stiff, facing outward toward the beam. As though the people who wore them are still standing in them, watching the light turn, waiting to describe what they see on the other side. Cape Morgan, Automated, Active, ST 1881.